Collier to the podium.
President Manchin, Dean Kraft, members of the Board of Trustees, I'm honored to be here. To all the parents, thank you for being here. Without you, none of this would be possible. I'd also like to say thank you to my wife, Andi, and to my son, Nathan. To the graduates before me, I say congratulations. You have just received an education from the finest university in the state of Florida. Indeed, one of the best public universities this country has to offer. My daunting task is in the next few minutes to somehow add something meaningful to that exemplary experience. I know the University of Florida well. I grew up in Gainesville. My father received his master's in civil engineering and stayed here to teach for almost 3.5 decades. I sold Cokes in the stadium. When I was an undergrad, I worked for 2 years at the infirmary, working the midnight shift from midnight to 7 a.m. and did it again for another 3 years as a grad student to work my way through. I received a bachelor's in finance, master's in administration, and a law degree from this university. I consider this campus home. I love this university. Since we are all friends, all Gators, all members of the Gator Nation, I will simply tell a few stories. 3 stories. Stories I call the Renault, the Restaurant, and the Rock. I graduated from the University of Florida with my bachelor's in finance in 1974 and went off to Atlanta to seek my fortune. Like now, times were turbulent. The Yom Kippur War was barely 6 months past. The Arab oil embargo had just ended months ago. Like now, the economy was in a recession that, like now, was the most severe since World War II. Employment was headed up and peaked higher than it is now. GNP was headed down, and inflation was 11%. Yes, 11% inflation. I received exactly 1 job offer, and I took it. I also made a very conscious but very unusual decision at that time. I decided to continue to live the frugal life of a student. So I kept a beat-up car, a 1968 Renault, and I chose to live in a nondescript apartment in a decidedly non-glamorous part of town. I bought a few suits, but only because I had to. And while my contemporaries were purchasing new cars, designer clothes, and fancy stereos, I saw myself purchasing something quite different. I saw myself purchasing financial security, and with it a sense of personal freedom. And I believe that sense of freedom and financial security brought me a deeper contentment and more lasting happiness than any material possession could have ever brought me. The money I saved also provided me something else. It became down payment for some of my very first real estate investments, vital startup capital for what eventually became Paradigm Properties and the Collier companies. Which leads me to my next story, the restaurant. I am an entrepreneur. I started a business from scratch, no outside capital, 100% bootstrap. And since I'd never ever run a business before, every day was a grand adventure, uncharted territory to say the least. Lacking mentors, I turned to business books. I read them voraciously, and they were helpful, very helpful. I was and still am deeply committed to being a lifelong learner. The world will change on you. You need to keep growing. But there was something I found very puzzling. The world many of these authors described in these books was very different from the world I was experiencing. Their decisions seemed clear-cut, almost easy. Execution proceeded smoothly, even flawlessly. They evidently went seamlessly from one spectacular success to another. There were no doubts or second thoughts in their world. The world I was experiencing was very, very different. Decisions were difficult. I agonized over many of them. The world was foggy. Facts seemed foggy and uncertain. Execution seems to constantly run into snags. I kept wondering what I was doing wrong. When I would finally break through the sunlight and find this wonderful, orderly world without doubts that I kept reading about. Then finally I understood, and it was the analogy of the restaurant that made it clear. The authors were describing their dining room, where everything was done for show and presentation. White tablecloths, soft music, the warm glow of candles. Since an important goal of many of the books was to burnish the reputation of the author as a CEO or as a consultant, they tended to focus almost exclusively on the dining room. I, however, was back in the kitchen, where it was frequently loud, chaotic, and messy, but also where things got done, where the core of business operations resided. Thus, I learned to be more comfortable with uncertainty and doubt. I came to understand that it is rare that the way to your goal appears a clear path. Fog and driving rain often mask the way. But you can often see a few steps forward into the mist. And if you have a general idea of the direction in which you wish to go, then you can advance a step or two forward in the fog. And when you do that, when you find the courage to advance into the unknown, a miraculous thing usually happens. With each step, you can see one more step further. And when the sun finally breaks through and the fog lifts, you may not have taken an absolutely straight path to your goal, but you will find yourself much, much further along than those who never summon the courage to step forward at all. I mentioned I started a business, owning and managing multifamily real estate. I purchased my first real estate when I was 1972, when I was just 20 years old. It was a bare quarter of a mile from here, over by the law school. I keep a picture of it today in my office to remind me that from small acorns, mighty oaks can grow. The business started slowly, buying 3 or 4 houses a year. It took me 8 years until 1980 to get to 25 houses. And then the business started to take off. A decade after that first real estate purchase, I had 200 apartments. A decade further on, it was 1,000 apartments, 5-fold growth in just 10 years. And now, more than 3.5 decades after I began with a single apartment, a single duplex, the Collier apartment owns just under 10,000 apartments. And I have the honor, responsibility, and privilege of being the leader of almost 400 team members. People ask me how to succeed above and beyond the norm. More than anything else, it is the willingness to step forward into the fog, to advance into the unknown. Plan thoroughly, prepare meticulously, get a degree from the University of Florida, but find the courage to advance into the unknown, to take that leap. It can all be a little overwhelming, which is why you need a rock. And that brings me to my third and final story. For me, I find a rock in my journals. At home, in my office at home, there's a stack of yellow writing papers, some of legal length, the vast majority, letter length, 8.5 by 11. Stack's only 8 or 9 inches high, perhaps 10 at the most. There's not much to look at as things go. But that stack represents my journals, going back almost 30 years to 1982. Those journals chronicle my thoughts, my fears, my dreams. Most important, they contain my goals, my mistakes, my lessons learned. My journals have been a dependable companion to me throughout the decades. Over the years, the routine has varied. Sometimes I write in the pre-dawn hours when the earth is still and quiet. The pressures of the day have yet to call. At other times, late at night. At other times, I've written at great length on the weekends, thoughts spilling on the page as I've tried to make sense of the world around me and find my way forward, yes, forward into the fog. I have certainly not kept that journal daily, but I have definitely kept it faithfully. Writing helps clarify my thoughts and thus focus my efforts. Journaling centers and stills my mind. Journaling is my way of mentoring myself. They've been a source of great comfort and guidance. At least quarterly, I use those journals to review my goals and my progress towards the goals. And I set goals for all areas of my life, not just the professional or business or areas of career or finance. I set goals and create plans for my time with family and friends, for my health and physical fitness, goals for continuous learning, goals for community involvement, yes, goals for my spiritual growth. I believe that most of us go the same distance in life. It's just that sometimes we go in circles or tack back and forth over the same stretch. Goals are very important to help us set a course. Goals become the North Star to guide us forward, to ensure that our lives are well lived. A track runner named Steve Prefontaine once said, "To give anything less than your best is to sacrifice your gift." I challenge you never to sacrifice your gift. I challenge you to set daring goals. I challenge you to commit to a life of continuous learning, to always expanding the frontiers of your mind. They say the best way to predict the future is to create it. The future is yours to create, your future, our nation's future. The torch is now officially yours to carry forward to the next generation. You have what it takes. Make us proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. I would also like to recognize Nathan's family and friends who have joined us today and ask that they stand to be recognized.